Welcome, dear listener. You've entered Audible Archives, a sanctuary of sound where lost tales awaken, your guide through these ancient echoes and timeless legends. So lean back, breathe deep, and let the story begin. This is Audible Archives, where every word holds a whisper of magic. This is Audible Archives, and I'm Raul, your writer, host, and chronicler of crimes that don't make the front page, but leave blood in the cracks. In these next 5 cases, Detective S.R.H walks the line between obsession and justice. With every step forward, something darker watches from the corners. These are cases 11 to 15, and the mask of reason is slipping.
Case 11, The Stranger's Revenge. The rain came down relentlessly as Stephen Raul Hughes made his way through the mist-cloaked streets of Greystone. The small town, nestled away in the hills, had always been a place where time seemed to slow, where people lived and died in quiet obscurity. But tonight, the town felt different. A heavy, oppressive silence clung to the air. The kind of silence that spoke of something buried, something wrong. Hughes had received a call earlier that day from Sheriff Palmer, an old acquaintance from a case that had taken place years ago. The sheriff's voice had been tight, strained with an unspoken worry. "Hughes, I need your help. There's been a murder, and I don't know how to make sense of it. I know you've seen things like this." With little more than a brief description of the crime and a promise to meet him at the sheriff's office, Hughes had left the city behind, leaving the world of neon lights and chaos for the quiet, rain-soaked streets of Greystone. As he passed the old houses with sagging porches, their windows dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that the town was holding its breath. When he arrived at the sheriff's office, the building was as unassuming as the rest of the town. A squat, 2-story structure with peeling paint and a flickering porch light. Inside, the dim glow from a single desk lamp illuminated the tired face of Sheriff Palmer. The man looked worn, as if years of keeping the town's secrets had taken their toll. "Hughes," Palmer greeted, his voice gravelly. "Glad you could make it." He gestured to the empty chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat. We've got a mess on our hands." Hughes didn't waste any time. "Tell me about the victim," he said, settling into the chair. "John Gray," Palmer began, pulling a file from the desk drawer. "Ex-military. At least, that's what we thought. We figured he died overseas a few years ago, some kind of covert op gone wrong. But a few days ago, some of my men spotted him getting off a bus, right here in town. Then, a few hours ago, we found him. Mutilated. Left in a shack on the outskirts of Greystone, like an animal." Hughes felt the cold weight of the words. Mutilated. A crime of that nature didn't belong in a place like this. Small towns weren't known for such violence, at least, not in Hughes' experience. And this murder, with its brutality and strange timing, felt out of place in the sleepy town of Greystone. "Who found him?" Hughes asked, already imagining the crime scene. "A couple of kids who were out in the woods. They came running into town screaming. By the time we got there, the body was cold, but the scene," Palmer's voice trailed off. "It's not like anything I've ever seen. They made sure the message was clear. Whoever did this, they wanted to make sure John Gray was gone for good." Hughes took the crime scene photos that Palmer handed him, studying them carefully. The body, twisted and unrecognizable, had been left in a state that spoke of rage and a personal vendetta. Whoever had done this had known Gray. Had known him intimately. The mutilation wasn't random, it was targeted, precise, and meant to send a message. "What's the story on Gray?" Hughes asked, his eyes still focused on the images. Why would anyone do this? Palmer sighed, rubbing his temple. That's just it. We don't know. Gray was always a bit of a mystery. He kept to himself. Quiet guy. Never really talked much about his time in the military. There's no family, no close friends. The whole town thought he died years ago, but now we're left with a lot of unanswered questions. What was he doing back here, and who wanted him dead? Hughes leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the possibilities. The town's quietness had been shattered, and he could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just about John Gray. Something bigger was at play here, something hidden under the surface of the town's sleepy exterior. What do you mean, the town's hiding something? Hughes asked, his gaze piercing. Palmer hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low. I don't know how much of it is true, but there are rumors. People say Gray was involved in something shady. Some say he was part of a secret mission during his time in the military. Others whisper that he was tangled in some kind of criminal network, but no one can prove it. It's all speculation. Why didn't you tell me this before? Hughes asked, his eyebrows furrowing. I didn't want to believe it, Palmer admitted. I thought maybe it was just the town's gossip. But now I'm starting to think there's something to it. Whatever Gray was involved in, it's clear he was important to someone, and someone wants him silenced. Hughes stood up, the room feeling smaller as the weight of the case settled on his shoulders. The death of John Gray was no ordinary murder. This was something much bigger, something deeper. He could feel it in his gut. The strings of a larger conspiracy were being pulled, and it was up to him to follow them, wherever they led. I'll need access to his belongings, Hughes said, his voice steady with determination. And I'll need to speak to anyone who might have seen him in the days before his death. We'll start at the shack. Palmer nodded, his expression grave. I'll make the arrangements. But be careful, Hughes. This town's not as quiet as it seems. As Hughes left the sheriff's office, the rain still pounded against the streets, and the mist wrapped around the town like a suffocating fog. The truth about John Gray's death was out there, waiting to be uncovered. But Hughes knew that with every step closer to it, the darkness would only grow thicker. And in a town like Greystone, the more you uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The rain had stopped by the time Hughes returned to his small, rented room above the town's local general store. The silence of Greystone weighed heavily on him, and he spent the night poring over every piece of information he could find on John Gray. The military records were sparse, the details about his service were impeccable, but then there was the gap, a blank space that stretched for several years. No assignments. No deployments. No official paperwork. Just a hole in the records that Hughes couldn't ignore. As he sifted through the files, something nagged at him. Gray's spotless records seemed too perfect, too calculated. In that missing time, what had happened during those years? Why would a decorated soldier simply disappear from the system? What had he been involved in that no one could account for? It was a mystery that was beginning to gnaw at Hughes. The following morning, he decided to take a different approach. He needed to hear from the people who had known Gray, even if they hadn't known him well. He walked through the empty streets of Greystone, the mist still lingering in the corners of his mind, and made his way to the town's only diner. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and greasy breakfast food filled the air. The diner was quiet, save for the sound of a few murmured conversations and the clink of plates. Rachel Dean, the elderly woman who ran the diner, was behind the counter, wiping down the surface with a cloth. Her hands were weathered, and her movements were slow, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, followed Hughes as he approached. "Morning," Hughes said, sitting at one of the stools. "I'm here about John Gray. I understand you knew him." Rachel didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied Hughes, her gaze lingering for a moment before she nodded. "John Gray," she echoed, her voice thick with the weight of memories. "That man, he came back, but he didn't look the same. He was different. Harder, somehow. I saw the fear in his eyes. Like he was waiting for something bad to happen. It wasn't the look of someone who was at peace with coming home. No, there was something else." Hughes leaned in slightly, his interest piqued. "What do you mean, something else?" Rachel placed a cup of coffee in front of Hughes, her hands trembling as she did. "I asked him once, when he came in here a couple of days before it happened. I asked him if he was okay, if he needed anything. And he just told me to stay out of it, to mind my own business. But I could see it, you know? The way he looked over his shoulder like he was expecting someone, or something." She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "There were whispers, Hughes. About things he did during the war. Things that didn't show up on any record. Some of the men who'd known him said he'd been part of something that wasn't supposed to be in the history books. But no one ever said exactly what." Hughes nodded, taking in her words. "Did he have anyone with him when he came back? Anyone who might have known what he was involved in?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't know, but there were rumors. Whispers about a group of men who used to meet near the old steel mill. You've seen it, haven't you? The place where they used to smelt metal. The whole area's abandoned now, but back then, they say some strange things happened there. I never asked what they were doing, but trust me, they weren't the kind of men you'd want to meet in a dark alley." The mention of the steel mill sparked something in Hughes' mind. The steel mill. It was a relic of Greystone's industrial past, a decaying monument to the town's once thriving economy. It had been shut down for years, but Hughes had heard the rumors. The whispers about shady meetings, late-night gatherings, and strange happenings in the old factory grounds. Could it be that John Gray had been involved with something, or someone, that was tied to the mill? He thanked Rachel for the information, his mind already racing as he paid for his coffee and headed out of the diner. Hughes now had a theory forming in his mind. Gray's return to Greystone wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew he was back, and they didn't want him alive. Hughes made his way to the steel mill, the air around him growing thicker with each step. The place was desolate, a crumbling industrial ghost town. Rusted metal and broken windows lined the perimeter of the once bustling factory, and the place seemed to hum with an eerie, latent energy. He could feel it then, the weight of something hidden in the shadows. Gray hadn't just returned to a town he once called home. He had come back to confront something from his past, something deadly. And now, it seemed, whatever it was had come for him first. As Hughes walked deeper into the mill grounds, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. There were eyes on him, watching from the darkness. The ghosts of the past weren't ready to let their secrets go, not yet. The old steel mill loomed ahead of Hughes like a decaying monument to Greystone's forgotten past. Rust had claimed the structure, its walls buckling under the weight of years of neglect. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, metal, and something more sinister, a lingering feeling of danger, as if the mill itself was holding its breath. Hughes approached the building, his boots crunching on the gravel as he took in the abandoned landscape. The place had been shut down for decades, a relic from a time when Greystone had been a bustling industrial hub. Now, it was a forgotten corner of the town, far removed from the daily lives of its residents. Yet, for all its silence, the mill seemed alive with secrets that John Gray had come back to confront. Inside, the space was cavernous, the remnants of a once thriving operation now just a graveyard of rusted machinery and broken windows. Hugh's flashlight caught through the darkness, illuminating bits of graffiti on the walls and old crates piled haphazardly in the corners. Empty whiskey bottles and discarded cigarette butts were scattered across the floor, evidence of the men who had once gathered here. The further Hughes ventured into the heart of the mill, the more he felt the weight of its history pressing down on him. It was as if the place itself remembered the things that had taken place here, the deals, the betrayals, the violence. Every step seemed to echo with the ghosts of the past. He snapped photographs of the markings on the wall, strange symbols that seemed almost ritualistic in nature. The sense that something had happened here, something far darker than anyone in Greystone would ever admit, grew stronger with each passing moment. Just as Hughes was about to move deeper into the shadows, he heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were soft at first, like the sound of someone trying to be discreet, but they were unmistakable. Hughes froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. He turned slowly, expecting to see the sheriff, or perhaps one of the locals who had followed him. Instead, a figure emerged from the doorway. The man was tall, his posture rigid and confident, with a dark coat that seemed to swallow the dim light around him. His face was weathered, with a scar running along his jawline, a permanent reminder of whatever battles he had fought in the past. He didn't look like someone from Greystone. He looked like a man who had seen too much and done even more. "I don't think you should be here," the man said, his voice low and commanding, carrying a weight of authority that made the air around them feel thicker. Hughes didn't flinch. His instincts were always sharp, and his mind was already analyzing the situation. The man didn't seem like a local, and he didn't seem intimidated by Hughes' presence. That could only mean one thing: this man knew something. "Who are you?" Hughes asked, his voice steady as he took a step forward, refusing to be intimidated. The man smiled thinly, as if amused by the question. "I was hoping you'd ask," he replied. With a casual movement, he stepped into the light, revealing the scar along his jawline more clearly. His eyes locked onto Hughes with a cold, calculating gaze. "Name's Frank Daniels. I knew John Gray. We had a history together." Hughes studied him for a moment, his mind working quickly. Daniels wasn't just some passerby or a curious local. This man had ties to Gray, and judging by the way he spoke, those ties were far from innocent. Daniels' casual demeanor only deepened the mystery. Why had he come here? What did he know about Gray's return? And why did he look like someone who was used to being in control? "What kind of history?" Hughes asked, his voice even, but his mind already connecting the dots. Daniel's smile widened as he took a step closer. "I don't suppose you've heard of the Mercs?" he asked, his tone almost playful, as though he was enjoying the confusion in Hughes' eyes. "The Mercs?" Hughes repeated, his mind trying to fit the pieces together. "Who are they?" Daniels chuckled softly, as if he was speaking to someone far beneath him. "You're on their turf now, detective," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. The Mercs aren't some small-time operation. They're a private army, a group of men with no allegiances except to whoever can pay the price. And John Gray? He was one of us, part of our little operation. But things went sideways, and now, well, let's just say Gray's return didn't sit too well with some of the people he left behind. Hugh's mind raced. The Mercs. A private army. Gray had been involved with them, had been one of them, even. It made sense now. The strange whispers around Gray's return, the fear in his eyes, the way he had distanced himself from the people he used to know. He hadn't come back to Greystone to visit old friends or rebuild his life. He had come back to face something, or someone, from his past. And whatever it was deadly. Hughes took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. "And what exactly do you want with me, Daniels?" he asked, his voice tight with growing suspicion. Daniels didn't flinch. "What do I want with you?" He repeated the question as if it were laughable. "You're already in the middle of this, detective. You came here to solve a murder, but what you don't know is that you're stepping into something much bigger than you realize. I suggest you turn around, walk out of this mill, and pretend you never heard of the Mercs. Because if you don't, well, let's just say you might not make it out alive." Hughes stared him down, the tension thick between them. He could feel the weight of the decision ahead. Daniels was clearly a man with dangerous connections, but Hughes was no stranger to danger. The truth was always worth the cost. "I'm not walking away, Daniels," Hughes said firmly, his hand inching toward the gun at his side. "I don't know who you think you are, but I'm here to get answers, and I'm not leaving until I have them." Daniels smiled, his expression darkening. "Then you're already in deeper than you think. Welcome to Greystone, detective." Daniels led Hughes deeper into the bowels of the steel mill, through a narrow, rusted door that creaked open with a sinister groan. The room beyond was dimly lit, with the faint glow of overhead bulbs casting long shadows across the cold concrete floor. Shelves filled with dusty crates and boxes lined the walls, but it was the scattered files and military equipment on a table in the center of the room that caught Hughes' attention. "This is where the real action happens," Daniels said, motioning to the cluttered table, where old maps, tactical gear, and several binders full of paperwork were strewn about. "The Mercs don't exactly leave behind a trail, but this is how you find out who's really in charge." Hughes could feel the tension rise in the air as he took a step closer, his eyes scanning the contents of the scattered documents. Daniels watched him closely, his arms crossed over his chest as though measuring Hughes' every move. The room smelled faintly of motor oil and old blood, the kind of place where deals were made and lives were often lost. "The Mercs," Daniels began, his voice taking on a darker edge, "are an underground network of mercenaries. They're global, well-connected, and have their fingers in more pies than you can imagine. These men have been involved in everything from covert ops to illegal arms deals to high-stakes military interventions. They've taken money from the highest bidders, no questions asked, and they've never left a loose end." Hughes flipped through one of the binders, each page revealing a trail of blood, names of soldiers, operations, and missions that stretched across continents. There were countries where the Mercs had operated with impunity, leaving chaos in their wake. And somewhere in all these files, John Gray's name kept popping up. Gray wasn't just some soldier, Daniels continued, his voice low and filled with resentment. He was one of the top operatives. A real asset to the group. After the war, he decided to get out, start fresh, get away from all the bloodshed. But some people you don't want to mess with, don't like loose ends. Hughes paused on one file, the pages covered with detailed notes on Gray's missions. Some of it was standard covert ops stuff, but there were others that hinted at darker undertakings. Deals with shady governments, weapons trafficking, and contracts to eliminate targets without leaving a trace. Gray hadn't just been part of a military unit, he'd been embedded in the darkest corners of the global underworld. Hughes' pulse quickened. He had been following a trail of corruption and death that stretched far beyond the borders of Greystone. It wasn't just about the murder of John Gray anymore. It was about the people who had orchestrated his death, and the web of lies they had spun around him. As Hughes continued to sift through the papers, his eyes stopped on a page that made his breath catch in his throat. There, among the names of other operatives, was a familiar one, Franklin Z. The same Franklin Z who had been part of the corruption scandal in a previous case. The same man who had pulled the strings from the shadows, whose influence had reached into the very heart of government. Hughes' mind raced. This wasn't just a simple murder in a small town. This was a global operation, with fingers in every pie, and John Gray had been caught in the middle of it. Daniels saw the realization on Hughes' face and smiled, a twisted, knowing grin that only deepened the mystery. "You see, Gray didn't just leave the Mercs," he said, his tone dark. "He crossed them. And when you cross men like Franklin Z and his people, well, you're as good as dead. That's why he came back. He didn't just come to Greystone to hide. He came to find something. Something that would have cost him his life." Hughes snapped the binder shut, his mind reeling with the implications of what Daniels was saying. Gray had come back to town for a reason. There was something here in Greystone, something tied to his past that had made him a target. And now, with Z's name on the list, the entire operation was coming into focus. It wasn't just about a local murder, it was part of something much larger. Gray didn't just disappear, Hughes said, his voice grim. He was trying to find something. What was it, Daniels? What did he uncover? Daniels leaned forward, his gaze intense. The question is, Hughes, what do you think he found? Hughes' mind worked quickly, piecing together the facts. Gray hadn't come back to Greystone to live in peace. He had come back because he had uncovered something tied to Z and the Mercs. And now that Hughes was involved, he was on the radar of the same dangerous people who had silenced Gray. "You're digging into things that go far beyond this town," Daniels warned, his voice a low growl. "Greystone's just the tip of the iceberg. You keep poking around, and you're going to wake up something that's been sleeping for a long time." Hughes didn't flinch. He had faced death before, and it had never stopped him. He was on the brink of something big, something that had the potential to change everything. He wasn't going to turn back now. "I'm not afraid of the darkness, Daniels," Hughes said coldly, his voice unwavering. "But you're right about one thing. I'm not leaving until I have answers." Daniels' smile faded, and his eyes grew colder. "Then you'd better be prepared, because you're about to get a lot more than you bargained for." The investigation had reached its breaking point. Hughes had spent days piecing together the puzzle, uncovering layers of corruption, betrayal, and death that led straight to the heart of a global mercenary network. And now, he was about to face the final piece of the puzzle, the man who had orchestrated it all, Franklin Z. The tip had come just hours before, a whispered warning from a contact who had somehow gotten wind of a secret meeting at a secluded farmhouse just outside of Greystone. It was clear that Gray's death had been a warning, not just to the town, but to Hughes himself. Z and his network weren't done with him, they were just getting started. Hughes couldn't afford to wait any longer. He grabbed his jacket, grabbed the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, and made his way toward the farmhouse. The drive was tense, the storm that had plagued Greystone now a distant memory, replaced by the quiet hum of the engine and the pounding of his heart. He knew this would be the moment of truth, the confrontation that would bring everything to a head. He wasn't sure who would make it out alive, but he was ready for whatever came next. As he approached the farmhouse, the ominous silence of the countryside weighed heavily on him. The house sat alone, isolated from the rest of the world, its windows dark. Hughes slowed the car, parking it a few hundred yards away, just out of sight. He moved quietly, staying low, the weight of the evidence heavy in his hands. He could hear voices, murmured conversation, coming from the inside of the house. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. Through a cracked window, he could see Franklin Z standing among a group of mercenaries, his back to the glass. They were speaking in low, urgent tones. Hughes caught snippets of their conversation, mentioning an operation gone wrong and a need to clean up the mess before it spiraled out of control. These were the men behind the curtain, corrupt, dangerous, and willing to kill to protect their secrets. Hughes didn't hesitate. He made his move, slipping around the back of the farmhouse. With one fluid motion, he kicked open the door and stormed into the room, gun drawn, his voice cutting through the tense air. "It's over," Hughes said, his tone cold and unyielding. His eyes locked onto Franklin Z, who turned to face him, a smug smile creeping across his face. Z didn't flinch. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice smooth and condescending. "There are bigger forces at play here, detective. You can't stop this. You never could." The room erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air, bullets ricocheting off the walls as mercenaries reached for their weapons. Hughes dove behind a stack of crates, returning fire as he moved, his mind focused and precise. This wasn't just a fight for his life, it was a fight for the truth. He had the evidence to expose Z and the mercenaries, but it wouldn't matter if he didn't make it out of here alive. The room became a blur of movement, flashes of gunfire, the screams of men struggling to hold onto their lives. Hughes moved with precision, picking off the mercenaries one by one, his training and instinct guiding him through the chaos. He could hear Z shouting orders, trying to maintain control of the situation, but Hughes was already one step ahead. With a well-placed shot, Z's bodyguard dropped to the floor, and the rest of the mercenaries hesitated. Hughes closed in on Z, who had backed himself into a corner. The man's grin had faded, replaced by a mixture of rage and fear. He reached for his gun, but Hughes was faster. With a single, controlled shot, Hughes took him down. The room fell silent. The echoes of the gunfire died away, replaced by the harsh sound of Hughes' labored breathing. He stood over the fallen mercenaries, his eyes scanning the room for any remaining threats. It was over. For now. Hughes walked toward Z, who lay on the floor, his hands still twitching as if trying to reach for something, but it was too late. Z was done. "You won't get away with this," Hughes said, staring down at him. "Your empire is finished." Z's eyes fluttered open, a twisted smile curling on his lips. "You think this is over?" he rasped, his voice weak but defiant. "This is just the beginning. There are others. You're just a pawn in a game you don't understand." Hughes shook his head. "I understand enough," he said coldly. "And I'm done playing." The sheriff and a small team of deputies arrived soon after, having been alerted by Hughes' earlier message. They rounded up the remaining mercenaries, securing the farmhouse and the evidence Hughes had gathered. But the truth was, they weren't the ones who had brought this to an end. It was Hughes' resolve, his unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, that had turned the tide. As Hughes watched the deputies take Z away in cuffs, he felt a strange sense of closure. The town of Greystone was safe, for now. The murder of John Gray had been solved, the connections to the Mercs exposed. But there was still the nagging feeling that the battle was far from over. The Mercs were a global network, and their reach was vast. The shadows would always be there, lurking, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. For Hughes, the case was closed, but the war was just beginning. The underworld never truly rests, and as long as there were people like Franklin Z out there, the darkness would always be waiting. Case 12, The Shadow of the Falcon. The evening had begun to turn cold, the kind of chill that settled deep in the bones. Stephen Raul Hughes sat in his cramped office, the only sound the faint hum of the overhead light and the occasional tapping of his fingers against his desk. It had been a slow week, with no pressing cases and no urgent calls. He was about to pour himself another drink when the door swung open. A woman entered, her silhouette framed by the harsh light from the hallway. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, wearing a deep red dress that caught the dim light just enough to hint at its elegance. A wide-brimmed hat shielded most of her face, but even from the shadows, Hughes could tell she was striking, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of untold stories. She moved with the grace of someone used to being watched, someone who wasn't afraid of standing out. "I need your help, Detective Hughes," she said, her voice smooth but taut with urgency. Hughes didn't say anything immediately. He simply regarded her, eyes narrowing slightly. The way she spoke made it clear she wasn't just another run-of-the-mill client. No, this woman had something more than a simple problem. She had a mystery in need of unraveling, and Hughes couldn't help but feel the intrigue stir in his chest. "I'm listening," he said after a moment, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of his face. The woman stepped into the office, and the faint scent of perfume, a mix of jasmine and something woodsy, lingered in the air. She lowered her hat, revealing a pale face, sharp features, and lips painted the color of wine. "I'm looking for something," she said, her gaze locking with his. There was an intensity in her eyes, a desperation veiled by a practiced calm. "A statue. A very special statue." Hughes raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. He had seen his fair share of odd requests in his time, but this was new. "What kind of statue?" he asked, his tone casual but his mind already starting to piece together the possible threads. "A falcon," she replied, her voice softening as though the mere mention of it brought a shadow over her. "The Maltese falcon." Hughes felt a slight shift in his chest. The name was familiar. He had heard of the legendary Maltese falcon before, whispers of its mysterious past and its value, not just as an artifact, but as an object that had changed hands through the years, leaving a trail of dead bodies in its wake. To some, it was a fabled treasure. To others, it was a cursed object, something whose dark history was written in blood. "What makes you think it's here?" Hughes asked, his mind working quickly. He had been in Greystone long enough to know that most people didn't come here to look for artifacts or treasure. There were no grand museums, no rare collections. This was a small town, a place where the past was often buried beneath the weight of forgotten secrets. The woman hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her purse before she spoke again. I have reason to believe it's in this town. It's been missing for years, but the trails led me here. There are people, dangerous people, who want it, and they won't stop until they have it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Hughes could see the fear behind her confident exterior, but there was something else too, resolve. This woman had made her decision. Whatever the cost, she was determined to find the Falcon. Who's after it? Hughes asked, his voice low but steady. She sighed, her eyes flickering with something that looked like regret, before quickly masking it with a cold mask of composure. Nicholas Havoc, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's the one who has it, or had it. I'm not sure which, but he's connected to some very dangerous people. I've already tried to get close, but I've barely scraped the surface. I need someone who can get the job done. Hughes studied her for a moment. Havoc. The name didn't ring any bells, but the fact that this woman knew it, and the way she spoke of him, told Hughes all he needed to know about the level of danger involved. This wasn't just a case of stolen property. This was something far more complicated. And far more deadly. Why me? Hughes asked, keeping his voice neutral, but his curiosity growing. You're the only one I can trust to find it. Everyone else has either failed or disappeared. You have a reputation for getting to the heart of things, no matter how messy they get. She paused for a beat, then added, and I'm willing to pay well for your help. Hughes let her words settle in. It wasn't the first time someone had offered him money to take on a dangerous case, but there was something about this one that felt different. Something about the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, made him feel like there was more to this than a simple treasure hunt. All right, he said finally, standing up from his desk. He couldn't let this go. I'll take the case. But it won't be cheap. Vivian's lips curved into a faint smile. I wouldn't expect it to be. She slid a thick envelope across the desk toward him. Hughes glanced at it, then at her. The promise of a sizable payout was enough to make him take the case, but there was something else in her eyes, something that made him think this case would be more complicated than he could possibly imagine. She stood to leave, but before she did, she paused. Just remember, detective, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, you're not the only one looking for the Falcon. There are people who will stop at nothing to get it, and they won't hesitate to kill anyone in their way. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Hughes alone with the envelope and 1,000 questions. As the door clicked shut behind her, Hughes sat back down in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the envelope. He knew there were risks involved. He knew the Falcon was more than just a statue, it was a piece of a larger puzzle, and if he was going to find it, he would have to navigate a dark world of criminals, thieves, and people with a lot to hide. For now, though, his first step was clear. He needed to find out more about Nicholas Havoc, and why the Maltese Falcon had been so elusive for so long. And somehow, in the back of his mind, Hughes couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to lead him into the heart of something far more sinister than he was prepared for. The dimly lit office was a far cry from the comforts of Stephen Raul Hughes' usual workspace. He sat at his desk, the shadows of the room pressing in on him like the walls were closing in. The file in front of him, its contents marked with scribbled notes and red lines, was a tangled mess of dead ends and half-truths. He had barely slept since his encounter with Vivian Lorne, the mysterious woman who had brought him into this labyrinth of crime and deception. Her eyes had held secrets, but her lips had stayed sealed, revealing only what she wanted him to know. Still, she had given him a lead, a thread that Hughes knew he had to follow. The Falcon. It was said to be an object of great power, one that had been lost after a high-profile heist in Europe years ago. Whispers in the underground circles spoke of it being passed from one dangerous collector to another, each owner meeting a tragic end. Some said the Falcon was cursed, others claimed it was simply a symbol of greed that always led to disaster. The last known owner was a man named Nicholas Havoc, a criminal mastermind with ties to illicit markets across the globe. Hughes had spent the next few days tracking down every lead, questioning anyone who might know anything about Havoc, or the Falcon, or any connection between them. The search had brought him to a dead end every time, until he'd received word of a shady nightclub on the outskirts of Greystone, a place where whispers and deals were made in the dark corners of the room. It was a foggy evening when Hughes arrived. The club, the Marlowe, was tucked away behind a row of neglected warehouses. Neon lights flickered above, casting a sickly glow over the entrance. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap liquor. The hum of conversation was laced with nervous energy, and the faint clink of glass against wood echoed through the room. Hughes walked in without hesitation, his eyes scanning the dimly lit space. He'd been in places like this before, too many times, in fact. The club was filled with people who had secrets to hide, people who had something to sell, something to lose. But Hughes wasn't interested in the regular patrons. He was looking for someone specific, Max, a known associate of Havoc, who had a reputation for being both skittish and talkative when put under pressure. After a few moments, Hughes spotted him at the bar, hunched over a drink, his nervous eyes darting around the room as if he expected danger from every direction. The man was jittery, looking as if he had been up all night, sweat glistening on his forehead, his hands trembling around the glass. Hughes approached slowly, making his way through the crowded space until he was standing next to Max. He leaned in close, his voice low but commanding. "Max, we need to talk." Max's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly masked it with a nervous chuckle. "Who the hell are you?" "I don't know you, man," he stammered, but there was a twitch in his voice that told Hughes everything he needed to know. The man was on edge, and when people were on edge, they often talked too much. "You know who I am. Nicholas Havoc." "I'm here because of him," Hughes said, the words hanging between them like a threat. "You're going to tell me everything you know about him, and the Falcon." Max's face paled at the mention of the Falcon. He gulped, his eyes darting to the door and then back to Hughes, weighing his options. There was fear in his eyes, a raw, palpable fear that wasn't just from Hughes' presence. Something was weighing on him, something far darker than he could explain. "The Falcon," Max whispered, leaning closer, his voice barely audible. "It's real. God help me, it's real. And it's here, in Greystone." He looked around nervously, almost as if he expected someone to overhear. "It's been passed from hand to hand, and every owner dies, detective. One by one. Some say it's cursed, some say it's just bad luck, but every person who's had it, they're dead. And now it's in Havoc's hands. That's where it is, hidden in a safe house in the city. But you don't want to get close to it. You don't." Hughes listened intently, the words sinking into his mind like heavy stones. The idea of a cursed artifact seemed outlandish at first, but the evidence was mounting. People died in Havoc's wake, and whatever the Falcon was, it had some sort of deadly power. Hughes wasn't a superstitious man, but he knew that sometimes the most dangerous things weren't just myths, they were very real. And Havoc? Hughes pressed, trying to keep the conversation focused. What's his play here? Why does he want the Falcon? Max took a shaky breath, his eyes wide with fear. Havoc's got connections, you know? He's connected to the underground world, the black markets, the arms deals, the whole damned system. But this Falcon, it's more than just an object to him. He thinks it's a key. A key to power, real power. And once he has it, there's no telling what he'll do. Max wiped his brow with the back of his hand, glancing around again. Hughes knew he had to push further, but the man was breaking down, his fear and paranoia spiraling out of control. Where is it? Hughes asked. Where's the safe house? Max leaned forward, speaking quickly, his voice trembling. I don't know exactly, but I know where to start. A warehouse. On the edge of town. It's where Havoc does his business. Find it, and you'll find the Falcon. But be careful, it's not just Havoc you need to worry about. There are others who want it, too. Hughes took a deep breath, his mind already racing through the possibilities. He had what he needed, the location. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but this was far from over. The Falcon was the key to something bigger, and if Havoc got his hands on it, nothing would stop him. Thanks, Max, Hughes said, his voice cold. He pushed away from the bar, turning toward the exit. But before he could leave, Max grabbed his arm, desperation in his eyes. Detective, please. You have to believe me. Don't go near it. The Falcon, it's a curse. Whoever owns it, they die. I swear to God, you don't want to get involved. But Hughes didn't stop. He didn't have time for warnings. He had a lead, and now it was time to follow it. As he left the nightclub and stepped out into the night air, Hughes' mind was already shifting gears. The Falcon was real. And so was the danger that came with it. His next move would bring him closer to the truth, but the cost of finding that truth was something Hughes wasn't sure he was ready to pay. The hunt for the Falcon had begun. The mansion stood like a forgotten monument at the edge of Greystone, its crumbling exterior and overgrown gardens making it seem more like a haunted relic of the past than a place of danger. The iron fence, once ornate and proud, had rusted with time, and the windows were dark, the glass either shattered or covered in grime. Despite its appearance, Stephen Raul Hughes knew better. He had learned long ago that the most unassuming places often hid the greatest threats. The Falcon was inside. That much was certain. He could feel it in his bones. The cursed object, the one that had passed through countless hands, leaving death and despair in its wake, was somewhere within this mansion. And whoever possessed it now was not going to let it go easily. Hughes approached the mansion cautiously, his steps quiet as he moved through the shadows. The night air was cold, but his focus was unshakable. He knew there were guards posted around the perimeter. He had been briefed by his informant, Max, about the level of security surrounding the place. But Hughes was no stranger to these kinds of operations. He had slipped past men far more dangerous than these, using only his wits and his ability to blend into the dark. He circled the property, his eyes scanning every window, every corner, every shadow. The mansion was large, but Hughes was methodical. His experience told him that the best way to infiltrate a place like this was to find a weak spot. He soon spotted a side door, half hidden by the thick vines that had crept up the exterior of the building. It was unlocked. A stroke of luck, but Hughes didn't believe in luck. He stepped forward, his gun drawn, and slipped inside. The air inside the mansion was thick with dust, a musty odor of decay hanging in the atmosphere. The floors creaked under his weight, each step echoing through the empty halls. He moved quickly, silently, his senses on high alert. The mansion was eerily quiet, save for the occasional groan of the old house settling into the night. Hughes knew that silence was just as dangerous as noise. It meant they were expecting him, or perhaps they were just waiting. He checked every room on the first floor. It was clear the place had been abandoned for years. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and the walls were lined with faded wallpaper. But there was no sign of life. No movement, no voices, nothing. The only sound was the thudding of his own heartbeat as he descended the stairs to the basement. The basement door was locked, but Hughes wasn't bothered by such obstacles. He had dealt with locked doors before. He found a rusted key in the back of a drawer in the kitchen and unlocked it with ease. As the door creaked open, the scent of mildew and stale air hit him, but it wasn't the smell that made his pulse quicken, it was the voices. Deep, gravelly voices. Men speaking in low tones. Hughes moved closer, careful not to alert them to his presence. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his gun ready. The basement was dark, save for a faint light coming from behind a closed door at the far end of the room. Through the crack in the door, Hughes could see the faint outline of a large object draped in velvet. His heart raced as he recognized the shape. It was unmistakable. There, hidden in the shadows of the basement, was the Maltese Falcon. But before he could make his move, a faint sound reached his ears, footsteps. Coming from behind. It was too late to retreat, and Hughes wasn't about to give up the Falcon without a fight. He spun around quickly, raising his gun. But before he could take aim, a cold barrel pressed against his chest. Looking for something, detective? The voice was smooth, laced with an arrogance that Hughes had come to recognize. It was the voice of a man who had no fear of the law, of consequences, or of anything at all. It was Nicholas Havoc. Hughes' fingers tightened around the grip of his gun, but he didn't make a move. Not yet. Havoc had him cornered, but Hughes knew that sometimes, a moment of stillness could give you the advantage. He studied Havoc, taking in the man's cold, calculating expression and the way his hand gripped the gun with practiced ease. "You've been a problem for me, detective," Havoc continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "But you're too persistent for your own good. You don't know when to quit." Hughes didn't respond. He didn't need to. He was already thinking ahead, trying to figure out how to escape this situation. He wasn't going to let Havoc walk away with the Falcon, not after everything that had happened. He had come too far. Havoc took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Hughes' face. "You're not the first to come looking for the Falcon. And you won't be the last. But you will be the first to find it. Lucky you." Hughes' pulse quickened. He had the feeling this wasn't just a game for Havoc. The man had something far more dangerous in mind than simply hiding the Falcon. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about power. There was something more at play here. Hughes needed to find out what, and he needed to do it before Havoc made his move. "I know you, Havoc," Hughes said quietly, his voice steady despite the danger. "You're always pulling the strings. Always in the background. But this time you're not getting away." Havoc smiled, a cold, wicked grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can stop me, detective? You really think you're the one who's going to bring me down? You don't understand the stakes here." Hughes didn't reply. Instead, he took a small step to the side, subtly positioning himself. He couldn't waste time talking. The Falcon was within reach, and Havoc's men were somewhere nearby. The clock was ticking. Every second counted. "You're running out of time," Havoc warned, his finger twitching on the trigger. "You won't make it out of here alive, detective." But Hughes was already moving. He didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he disarmed Havoc and shoved him back, sending him stumbling into the shadows. The gun clattered to the floor. Hughes advanced, gun in hand, his eyes locked on the Falcon. Havoc's smirk faltered as he reached for a second gun hidden in his jacket. Hughes didn't give him the chance. He stepped forward, quick and precise, and slammed his foot down on the weapon before it could be drawn. "Enough," Hughes growled, his voice low and menacing. "You're not getting away this time." Havoc glared at him, fury in his eyes, but Hughes was already turning away. He had what he needed. The Falcon was close now, closer than ever. The air in the basement was thick with tension, a moment suspended in time. Hughes' grip tightened on his gun as he faced Nicholas Havoc, the man who had become the center of this twisted web. Havoc's face was a mask of cold amusement, his lips twisted into a cruel smile, but his eyes never left Hughes. There was something unsettling about the calm way Havoc regarded him, like he was watching a fly caught in a web, knowing that the end was inevitable. Hughes stood his ground, unfazed by the weapon still trained on him. His mind raced as he weighed his options. He had come this far, navigating the shadows of Greystone, following a trail of lies, and now he stood face to face with the man who controlled it all, the man who had the one thing Hughes had been chasing for so long, the Maltese Falcon. "I'm looking for the Falcon," Hughes said coolly, his voice steady, every word deliberate. "And I'm not leaving without it." Havoc chuckled darkly, the sound reverberating through the stone walls of the basement. "You're not the first person to come looking, and you won't be the last. The Falcon has a way of drawing people in, but it also has a way of destroying them." The words sent a shiver down Hughes' spine, but he didn't flinch. He had heard the rumors, the tales of the Falcon's cursed history, of the deaths that followed those who sought it. But Hughes wasn't here for the myths. He was here for the truth, for the answers he needed to unravel the chaos that had enveloped his life. "You're holding something dangerous," Hughes said, his voice gaining strength. "And you're going to regret it." Havoc's smile widened, but his eyes remained as cold as ice. "Maybe. Or maybe you'll just be another casualty in the long line of people who have crossed paths with the Falcon. I'm not afraid of you, detective. You're just a pawn in a game much bigger than you." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Hughes could feel the weight of them, the realization that Havoc was right. This wasn't just about the Falcon. It was about power, control, and something far darker, forces that Hughes was only beginning to understand. As the tension between them escalated, Hughes could sense the danger mounting. Havoc was playing a game, but he wasn't playing alone. Around them, the atmosphere seemed to shift, the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The basement door opened with a creak, and several of Havoc's men stepped into the room, weapons drawn, their eyes hard with malice. They were ready to fight, to kill if necessary. The walls of the basement seemed to close in around Hughes as the armed men surrounded him. His options were growing slimmer by the second. He could fight, take out the mercenaries, take the Falcon, and escape with answers. Or he could back down, let Havoc win, and watch as the Falcon's curse continued to consume everyone in its path. But Hughes wasn't a man who backed down. Before he could make his next move, the sound of a voice cut through the tension like a knife. It was a woman's voice, cold and commanding. "Let him go, Havoc." Hughes' head snapped toward the door as a familiar figure stepped into the room, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. Vivian Lorne. Her posture was poised, her gun raised with perfect precision. Her eyes locked onto Havoc, unwavering and unflinching. The mercenaries hesitated for a moment, their attention diverted. Havoc's eyes narrowed in surprise. He hadn't expected Vivian to show up, not here, not now. But there was no mistaking the determination in her stance. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a player in this game, and it was clear that she wasn't about to back down. "You?" Havoc said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "I should have known." Vivian's gun didn't waver as she took a step forward. Her gaze never left Havoc's face. "I'm done with the games," she said, her tone flat and final. "You can keep your Falcon, but you won't be keeping it for long." The words were like a spark in dry tinder, setting the tension in the room alight. The standoff stretched on, the air thick with unspoken threats. Hughes stood between them, torn. He wasn't sure if Vivian was here to help him or if she had her own agenda, her own reasons for showing up. But one thing was clear, with her presence, the balance of power had shifted. Havoc's face twisted into a frown, his hands twitching, but he didn't make a move. "You think you can just waltz in here and take the Falcon from me?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Vivian didn't flinch. "No," she said, her voice low. "But I know enough to know that this Falcon, it's not worth the cost. And I'm done paying it." Hughes watched the interaction unfold with sharp eyes. He had seen enough to know that this was no longer just a fight for the Falcon, it was a fight for survival. The game they were playing was more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and Vivian's sudden intervention only made things more complicated. Hughes didn't trust her completely, but he couldn't deny that she had thrown a wrench into Havoc's plans. She had tipped the scales in their favor, for now. Havoc seemed to consider his options for a moment, his cold eyes flicking back and forth between Hughes and Vivian. The room was filled with the tension of 1,000 unspoken threats, and Hughes could sense that the next few moments would decide everything. He could feel the weight of the Falcon nearby, the object that had caused so much death, so much destruction. And now, in the heart of Greystone, it lay within their reach. But the question remained, what was he willing to do for it? What was he willing to sacrifice? Hughes' mind raced as he made his decision. The stakes were higher than ever before. The Falcon wasn't just a piece of priceless art or a symbol of greed, it was a key. A key to something far darker than he had imagined. Hughes had to act fast, or they would all fall victim to the curse that surrounded it. The time to hesitate was over. He took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Let's finish this." The game was far from over, but the final move had begun. The air in the basement was heavy with dust and tension as Hughes stood over the Maltese Falcon, his face etched with a mixture of resolve and regret. The object that had been the centerpiece of greed, betrayal, and death now lay at his feet, its polished exterior catching the dim light of the single overhead bulb. Around him, the remnants of the confrontation lingered, Havoc's men subdued, Vivian leaning against the wall, her gun still in hand, and Havoc himself unconscious in the corner after a well-placed blow. Hughes stared at the Falcon, the weight of its history pressing down on him like a physical force. He had spent days chasing it, unraveling the lies and violence it had left in its wake. The stories he had heard, the lives it had destroyed, they all seemed to emanate from the gleaming artifact before him. For a moment, he felt the pull, the temptation to claim it for himself. The Falcon wasn't just a prize, it was a legacy, a mystery that had captivated and consumed countless people before him. "You don't have to do this," Vivian said, her voice breaking the silence. There was an edge to her tone, a hint of desperation she was trying to mask. "It's just a thing. A symbol. Destroying it won't undo what's been done." Hughes turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But it will stop it from happening again." Vivian's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't respond, but the tension in her stance spoke volumes. She had come here for her own reasons, her own motives, but now she seemed to recognize that Hugh's determination was something she couldn't sway. Without another word, Hughes reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small steel hammer, one he had taken from the mansion's cluttered garage during his search. He gripped it tightly, feeling the cold metal in his hand as he crouched down beside the Falcon. The intricate details of the statuette stared back at him, its bejeweled eyes, its delicate craftsmanship. It was beautiful, a masterpiece, and yet it was a beacon of destruction. Vivian watched in silence, her arms crossed as Hughes raised the hammer. "You could sell it, you know," she said, her voice softer now, almost wistful. "Live a life of luxury. Walk away from all of this." Hughes froze for a moment, the hammer poised in the air. He looked up at her, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "And how many more would die because of it?" he asked, his voice sharp and unwavering. "How many more would kill for it?" Vivian didn't answer. She didn't need to. The unspoken truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable. With a single swing, Hughes brought the hammer down, striking the Falcon with a deafening crack. The sound echoed through the basement, sharp and final. A jagged line split across the Falcon's surface, and with another swing, it shattered into pieces. The glittering shards scattered across the floor, their beauty reduced to fragments of what once was. Hughes exhaled, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his decision settled over him. He set the hammer down and straightened, his eyes scanning the wreckage. The Falcon was gone, its allure and curse extinguished. Vivian stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You could have taken it for yourself," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "But you chose to end the madness." Hughes didn't answer immediately. He stared at the broken pieces, his mind racing with the memories of the case, the lies, the deaths, the desperation. "Some things aren't worth the cost," he said finally, his voice low. "Not for me. Not for anyone." The distant sound of sirens broke the silence, growing louder as they approached. Hughes glanced at Vivian, his brow furrowing. "You should go," he said. "The police won't care about your reasons for being here." Vivian hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She turned and walked toward the exit, pausing briefly in the doorway. "You did the right thing," she said without looking back. But that doesn't mean the darkness is gone. And then she was gone, leaving Hughes alone in the dimly lit basement. The sirens grew closer, and Hughes knew it was time to leave. He gathered his thoughts, the weight of the case still heavy on his shoulders. The Maltese Falcon, the cursed relic that had driven so many to their doom, was no more. But the questions it raised, the greed, the corruption, the darkness it symbolized, would linger. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Hughes took a deep breath, his gaze turning to the horizon. The Falcon was gone, but the shadows it had cast would remain. For Hughes, the case was over, but the lesson it had taught him was clear: some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some treasures are better left in ruins. Case 13. The Curse of Blackmoor Estate. Stephen Raul Hughes leaned back in his chair, the smoke from his cigarette curling lazily toward the ceiling of his dimly lit office. The city's muffled hum seeped through the cracked window pane, but his world was confined to the cluttered desk before him, files, coffee-stained case notes, and a revolver that hadn't left his sight in weeks. The sudden ring of his phone sliced through the quiet, jolting him from his thoughts. Picking up the receiver, he was met with a voice that carried equal parts urgency and dread. "Mr. Hughes? This is Professor Arthur Kane. I need your help," the voice stammered. Hughes straightened, his curiosity sparked. Kane was a respected academic, a man known for his rational approach to even the most puzzling phenomena. Yet his tone was anything but composed. "What seems to be the problem, Professor?" Hughes asked, his voice steady. "My cousin, Reginald Blackmoor, is dead. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, but the circumstances," Kane hesitated, his breath audible over the line, "they're not natural." Hughes frowned, his instincts telling him there was more to the story. "Go on." "The locals are saying it's the Blackmoor curse," Kane continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, as though afraid someone might overhear. "A monstrous hound, a creature said to haunt my family's estate, has struck again. Reginald's body was found on the moors." His face, Kane paused, as if summoning the courage to describe it. His face was contorted in sheer terror. And near his body, they found paw prints. Enormous paw prints, larger than any natural beast could make. Hughes let the words hang in the air for a moment, the weight of them settling in. Legends, curses, and spectral beasts weren't his usual fare, but the fear in Kane's voice was palpable. He'd learned long ago that even the wildest stories often concealed a kernel of truth. "Why come to me?" Hughes asked. "Because the local authorities won't look past the obvious," Kane replied, his frustration evident. "They see a heart attack. They don't see the fear, the tracks, the pattern. You're known for uncovering what others miss, Mr. Hughes. That's why I need you." Hughes nodded to himself, the gears in his mind already turning. "What can you tell me about this curse?" Kane hesitated, then relented. "The story goes back generations. The Blackmoor family's founder, Charles Blackmoor, was said to have wronged a rival in some unspeakable way. The man cursed our bloodline, vowing that a beast, an enormous hound, would stalk the family forever, claiming any Blackmoor who dared set foot on the estate. It's an old tale, one I always dismissed. But now..." Hughes cut him off gently. "Legends aside, what do you want me to do?" "I want you to find the truth," Kane said firmly. "I don't believe in curses, but I can't ignore what's happening. There's a train to Blackmoor tomorrow morning. I'll have someone meet you at the station." Hughes jotted down the details and hung up, his mind already racing. Blackmoor Estate. A curse. A man dead on the moors with terror etched into his face. It had all the trappings of superstition, but Hughes had a feeling there was more to the story. As he packed his essentials, his revolver, a notebook, and a battered trench coat, he couldn't shake a nagging thought. Whether curse or conspiracy, something was waiting for him on those moors. By dawn, Hughes was aboard the train, its rhythmic clatter carrying him deeper into the countryside and further from the familiar safety of the city. The landscape grew wilder as the hours passed, the rolling hills giving way to bleak, windswept moors that stretched endlessly under a gray sky. When the train finally pulled into the tiny station at Blackmoor, a wiry man in a flat cap was waiting. He introduced himself as Ellis, the caretaker of the estate. "Professor Kane sent me to fetch you," Ellis said, his voice tinged with a local accent and a hint of unease. Hughes followed Ellis to an old, rattling car that seemed as weathered as the man himself. As they drove, Ellis filled the silence with nervous chatter. "You'll hear the locals talk, sir, about the Blackmoor hound. Nonsense, if you ask me, but, well, people have seen things. Heard howls in the night. It's enough to put the fear of God in anyone." Hughes didn't reply, his focus on the darkening horizon and the sprawling estate that loomed ahead. Blackmoor House was a massive, brooding structure of stone, its towers and gables silhouetted against the twilight. The estate was surrounded by moors, vast and empty, their desolation broken only by the occasional twisted tree or jagged rock. As the car approached the front gates, Hughes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Something about this place felt wrong, as though it had soaked up centuries of fear and despair. Ellis stopped the car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "This is where I leave you, sir," he said. "I'll be in the village if you need anything. Good luck." Hughes stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. The house loomed before him, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Somewhere in those halls, or out on the moors, lay the answer to Reginald Blackmoor's death. As Hughes pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the cold, echoing foyer, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The legend of the Blackmoor hound might have been dismissed as folklore, but Hughes had learned to trust his instincts. And his instincts told him that something, or someone, was watching. The Blackmoor estate emerged from the swirling fog like a specter, its jagged silhouette framed by the desolate moors. The closer Hughes came, the heavier the air seemed to grow, laden with an oppressive stillness that pressed against him. The front gates were rusted and groaned in protest as he pushed them open. The long gravel drive led to the sprawling mansion, its weathered stone walls blackened with age. The windows stared back at him like hollow eyes, and the skeletal remains of ivy clung desperately to the walls, as though the house itself were being strangled by time. At the door, Hughes was met by Mrs. Dalton, the estate's caretaker. She was a thin, sharp-featured woman whose demeanor was as cold as the mist that clung to the moors. Her gray hair was tightly pinned, and her pale hands twisted the hem of her apron as she spoke. "The professor is in the study," she said curtly, avoiding Hughes's gaze. Her voice was clipped, but there was a tremor beneath her words. "He's been waiting for you." But, she hesitated, her eyes darting toward the darkening landscape. "You'd do well to leave before nightfall. The moors, they're not safe after dark." "Why?" Hughes asked, his tone steady. Mrs. Dalton glanced toward the window, her face pale. "Because it comes at night. Always at night. Before he could press her further, she turned abruptly and led him through the cavernous halls of the mansion. The interior was just as foreboding as the exterior: high ceilings, dimly flickering chandeliers, and walls lined with faded portraits of Blackmoor ancestors, their stern faces seeming to follow Hughes as he walked past. In the study, Professor Kane rose to greet him. He was a wiry man with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, his scholarly air marred by the evident strain he was under. "Mr. Hughes," he said, extending a trembling hand, "thank you for coming." The study was a testament to the Blackmoor family's history, its walls lined with dusty tomes and relics of a bygone era. A heavy desk sat at the center, cluttered with papers, photographs, and an ornate manuscript that caught Hughes's attention. Kane wasted no time. He gestured to the desk. "This is everything I've gathered. I don't know what's real and what's superstition, but Reginald, his death wasn't natural." Hughes began examining the items. There were photographs of the paw prints found near Reginald's body, massive impressions in the mud that dwarfed any known animal. The edges of the prints were jagged, as though the creature that made them had claws like knives. Then there was Reginald's diary, its pages filled with frantic, cryptic entries. "The howls are louder now, closer. It's as if the Moors themselves are alive with it. I saw the shadow again tonight, too large, too swift to be a man. I fear I am being hunted. The curse. Could it be real? I must leave, but the estate won't let me go." Finally, Kane handed Hughes the manuscript. Bound in cracked leather, it was a family document chronicling the legend of the Blackmoor Hound. It spoke of Charles Blackmoor, the estate's founder, and the blood feud that had birthed the curse. The manuscript described the hound as a beast of shadow and flame, summoned to stalk the Blackmoor line for eternity. "It's nonsense, of course," Kane said, though his voice wavered. "An old tale to frighten children. But something killed Reginald. Something real." Hughes set the manuscript down. "Superstition can be a convenient veil for human motives," he said, his tone pragmatic. "But fear doesn't arise from nothing. I'll need to investigate the estate and the Moors." Kane nodded reluctantly. "Be careful. The villagers say the hound hunts those who wander alone at night." Hughes smirked faintly. "I've faced my share of hunters." As night fell, Hughes ventured outside, the estate grounds cloaked in shadows. The air was damp and carried the faint scent of decay. Armed with a flashlight and his revolver, he began his survey. The grounds were eerily quiet, the only sounds his own footsteps and the distant rustle of the wind. Near the edge of the estate, he found deep gouges in the bark of several trees, as though massive claws had raked them. Nearby, the grass was trampled in wide arcs, the pattern suggesting something large and fast had moved through. Then came the howls. Low and guttural at first, they rose to an otherworldly wail that sent a shiver down his spine. The sound echoed across the moors, each note twisting into a haunting melody that seemed to seep into his bones. Hughes crouched, his flashlight sweeping the area. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something dark and enormous against the horizon. But when he focused, it was gone, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. As he returned to the house, the questions multiplied. The villagers' fear wasn't baseless. Something was out there, something that thrived in the darkness of the moors. Whether beast or man, Hughes knew one thing: the truth behind the legend of the Blackmoor Hound would not remain hidden for long. The morning sun was a faint blur in the gray sky as Hughes stepped onto the moors. The landscape stretched out before him, barren and foreboding. Wisps of mist coiled around gnarled shrubs and jagged rocks, concealing treacherous bogs that could swallow a man whole. Every step was an exercise in caution, the ground beneath him uneven and slick. It wasn't long before he came across Eliza, a young shepherdess tending her flock near the edge of the estate. Her weathered cloak and sturdy boots spoke of a life lived on the moors, but her wide eyes and trembling hands betrayed her unease. "You're the detective, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hughes nodded. "Stephen Hughes. You've heard about Reginald Blackmoor's death?" Eliza clutched her shawl tightly. "Everyone has. But it wasn't a heart attack, no matter what the constable says. It was the Hound." Hughes raised an eyebrow, his tone measured. "The Hound? You've seen it?" Eliza nodded fervently, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "It's no ordinary dog," she whispered. "Its eyes burn like fire, and its howl, it chills your soul. I've seen it, Mr. Hughes. And I've seen what it leaves behind." Her gaze turned toward the horizon, where the mist thickened into an impenetrable veil. "There's an old hunting lodge on the far edge of the moors," she said, pointing. "No one's been there in years. But I saw lights there a few nights ago. Strange lights. If you're looking for answers, that's where you'll find them." Thanking her, Hughes made his way toward the lodge. The journey was treacherous, the ground shifting beneath him with every step. The air grew colder as he approached, the stillness broken only by the occasional cry of a distant bird. The hunting lodge was a crumbling relic, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Vines and moss crept up its walls, but there were signs of recent activity. The door hung slightly ajar, and the faint scent of smoke lingered in the air. Inside, the lodge was dim and sparsely furnished, its wooden floors warped and covered in dust. But Hughes's keen eye quickly picked out the anomalies: a makeshift bed fashioned from old blankets, a pile of discarded food wrappers, and a tattered coat draped over a chair. He ran his fingers over deep scratches gouged into the walls, long, parallel marks that matched the paw prints found near Reginald's body. Whatever had made them wasn't human. On a rickety table, Hughes found a half-burned candle and a small pile of papers. Among them was a torn page from a ledger, listing what appeared to be payments from someone at the Blackmoor estate. The sums were large, the dates irregular. Hughes pocketed the page and turned to leave, his mind racing with possibilities. The lodge suggested two things: someone was hiding here, and they were tied to the estate. Back at Blackmoor, Hughes spent the afternoon poring over Reginald's diary again. The final entries took on a new significance. "I heard the voices again tonight. They come from the moors, faint but insistent. What are they saying? The deal must remain secret. If anyone finds out, it will ruin me. The Hound is real. I can feel its eyes on me, even in daylight. But this is my burden to bear." Hughes leaned back in his chair, his thoughts unraveling the threads of the mystery. Reginald had clearly been hiding something tied to this alleged deal. Whether the Hound was a supernatural force or a carefully constructed illusion, it was becoming evident that Reginald's death wasn't random. The pieces were beginning to align, but the full picture remained elusive. One thing was certain: the answers lay somewhere on the moors, shrouded in mist and shadow. Hughes sat across from Professor Kane in the study, the weight of his findings palpable in the air. The flickering light of the fireplace cast long shadows, dancing across the faces of Blackmoor ancestors hanging on the walls. Hughes held up the tattered coat he had retrieved from the hunting lodge. Reginald was involved in something dangerous, Hughes began, his voice firm. The hound isn't a ghost or a specter. It's flesh and blood, a living creature, trained to instill terror and maintain the myth of the Blackmoor curse. Kane frowned, his skepticism evident. You're suggesting someone engineered this? Why? To what end? Hughes reached into the coat's pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. This was inside, he said, placing it on the desk. It's for a purchase of rare chemicals, specifically phosphorescent compounds used in bioluminescence experiments. Someone coated the animal to make it glow in the dark, feeding the legend of a supernatural beast. Kane's eyes widened as he examined the receipt. You mean to say someone created this creature to scare people? That's preposterous. Not scare, control, Hughes countered. The Blackmoor estate has long been shrouded in superstition. Whoever is behind this wanted to exploit that fear to their advantage. Reginald's diary hinted at a deal, a secret so dangerous it cost him his life. Kane sat back, his expression conflicted. In the lodge? Hughes nodded. It's where the beast was kept. The scratches on the walls, the discarded food, it's clear someone has been maintaining and training it. As night fell, Hughes put his plan into action. Using the moors as his stage, he prepared a trap designed to expose the creature and its handler. Near the edge of the estate, he placed a lantern and a large slab of meat laced with sedatives. Then, he waited in the shadows, his revolver loaded with tranquilizer darts. Hours passed, and the stillness of the moors was broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind. Then, faintly at first, came the howls. They grew louder, more guttural, as the ground seemed to tremble beneath the approach of something massive. Hughes's eyes remained focused on the mist ahead. Suddenly, the beast emerged, a monstrous dog, larger than any Hughes had ever seen. Its fur glowed faintly in the dark, an eerie, phosphorescent shimmer that seemed almost otherworldly. Its eyes caught the light of the lantern, reflecting back like smoldering embers. The hound sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it locked onto the bait. Its movements were powerful yet unnatural, as though it had been driven to madness by whatever experiments had been conducted on it. Hughes steadied himself, waiting for the right moment. The beast lowered its massive head to the meat, but as it sniffed, its ears pricked up, and it let out a low growl. Before it could retreat, Hughes fired. The tranquilizer dart struck the beast's flank, and it let out a furious snarl before staggering. Its legs faltered, and with a heavy thud, it collapsed onto the ground. Hughes approached cautiously, his weapon still drawn. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying, its sheer size a testament to selective breeding or genetic manipulation. The phosphorescent glow clung to its fur like an unholy aura, but as he examined it, Hughes's earlier theory was confirmed. The hound was no ghost. It was a creation of flesh and blood, engineered to embody fear. With the beast subdued, Hughes's focus turned to its creator. He knew the person behind this had to be someone intimately connected to the estate's lore and the family's secrets. The answers were close, closer than ever, and the shadows that had long haunted Blackmoor were finally beginning to lift. The morning sun pierced through the thinning fog as Hughes stood in the village square. The hound, still sedated, lay in a cage brought in by the authorities. Villagers gathered cautiously, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief as they beheld the creature that had haunted their nightmares. "This is your hound," Hughes declared, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Not a demon, not a curse, just a beast made to look like one. And like all such tricks, there's someone behind the curtain." As the crowd stirred uneasily, Hughes laid out the evidence. The chemicals used to create the hound's eerie glow were traced back to a supplier in a nearby town, the same supplier whose records showed deliveries to the Blackmoor estate. The lodge on the moors had revealed even more: receipts for meat deliveries, specialized training equipment, and a ledger showing funds embezzled from the estate's accounts. The trail led back to Mrs. Dalton, the estate's caretaker. Hughes confronted her in the study, where she had been overseeing the day's preparations as if nothing were amiss. "You've been busy, Mrs. Dalton," Hughes said, stepping into the room. "Too busy for someone merely tending an old house." Mrs. Dalton froze but quickly composed herself. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Hughes." "You've been embezzling from the Blackmoor estate for years," Hughes said, his tone sharp. "You created the legend of the hound, using it to scare away anyone who might uncover your theft. And when Reginald Blackmoor began asking questions, you unleashed your creation to silence him for good." Her face paled, but her lips tightened in defiance. "Prove it," she hissed. "I already have." Hughes placed the receipts and ledgers on the table. "Your purchases, your payments, your lies. All here in black and white. And the hound? That was your masterpiece, a grotesque display of cruelty and cunning. But it's over now." The authorities escorted Mrs. Dalton away as the villagers looked on, their fear transforming into outrage. The legend that had held them captive for generations had been a fabrication, a tool of greed and malice. Before leaving the estate, Hughes stood once more in the moors, now bathed in sunlight. The fog had lifted, revealing a landscape that was no longer shrouded in mystery. "You underestimated me, Mrs. Dalton," Hughes said quietly to himself, recalling her venomous glare as she was led away. "Legends scare the weak, but it's the truth that always brings justice." As he departed Blackmoor, Hughes couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The curse of the Blackmoor hound had been broken, not by battling the supernatural, but by uncovering the truth. Sometimes, the darkest shadows were cast not by ghosts, but by the deeds of men. Case 14, The Iron Phoenix. Stephen Raul Hughes was sitting at his desk, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the cluttered room. His office smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and stale coffee, a testament to the late nights spent chasing leads and the weight of unsolved cases. The faint hum of the city outside was interrupted by the creak of the door opening. In stepped a woman unlike any Hughes had seen in years. Clad in an emerald green dress that clung to her figure with understated elegance, she moved with a grace that belied the urgency in her sharp, darting eyes. A string of pearls around her neck reflected the light, but it was her presence, commanding and mysterious, that immediately captured his attention. "Mr. Hughes," she began, her voice carrying a sultry yet steely tone, "I've heard you're the man who can find the unfindable. I need your help." Hughes took a measured sip of his coffee, masking his curiosity. He gestured to the chair across from him, its leather cracked and worn from years of use. "That depends on what's gone missing." The woman lowered herself into the seat with the poise of someone used to commanding attention. She set her purse on the desk, unclasped it, and pulled out a photograph. Sliding it across the table with her perfectly manicured fingers, she introduced herself. My name is Eleanor Vale. I'm an art dealer, specializing in rare and priceless artifacts. Her tone was polished, but there was an edge of desperation as she continued. It's called the Iron Phoenix, she said, nodding toward the photograph. Hughes picked it up, studying the image. The sculpture was small but arresting, a bird of prey, forged from dark iron, its wings captured mid-flight in sharp, angular lines. What caught his attention most, though, were the inlaid runes glowing faintly, even in the black and white photo. Quite the piece, Hughes murmured. It's more than art, Eleanor said, leaning forward. Legend says it's a key to something ancient and powerful. I've spent years tracking it down, and now, just 3 days after acquiring it, it's been stolen. The thieves are dangerous, Mr. Hughes, and I fear they won't stop until they unlock its secrets. Hughes placed the photo back on the desk, his sharp eyes never leaving hers. And why not go to the police? Eleanor hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the clasp of her purse. Because I don't trust them. Artifacts like the Iron Phoenix don't just disappear, they're taken. If the authorities get involved, it could vanish forever, or worse, fall into the wrong hands. Hughes nodded slowly, his instincts kicking in. The Iron Phoenix wasn't just a stolen bauble, it was a magnet for trouble. Where was it stolen from? My private gallery, Eleanor replied. It's heavily secured, alarms, guards, the works. But they were professionals. They bypassed everything. And I believe they're still here, in the city, trying to find a buyer or uncover the Phoenix's secrets. Hughes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. If I take this case, I'll need access to your gallery, any leads you've uncovered, and complete honesty. No surprises. Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. I wouldn't expect anything less. Time is running out, Mr. Hughes. Will you help me? He studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks. But something about her story, and the air of danger that clung to her, piqued his curiosity. He nodded. I'll take the case, Hughes said, grabbing his coat and revolver. Let's hope this Iron Phoenix is worth the trouble. As Eleanor rose to leave, her gaze lingered on him. More than you know, Mr. Hughes. More than you know. Little did Hughes realize, he'd just stepped into a labyrinth of greed, betrayal, and murder, where trust was a commodity and legends came to life. Hughes delved into the city's labyrinthine underworld, a seedy network of informants, fences, and smugglers who thrived in the shadows. He began with the usual suspects, those who had a reputation for handling stolen goods of high value and questionable origin. Word of the Iron Phoenix spread quickly, though most denied any knowledge of it. The artifact's reputation as both priceless and dangerous made even the boldest criminals uneasy. After hours of fruitless questioning, a tip from a jittery informant led Hughes to a grimy pawnshop on the edge of the docks. The sign above the shop flickered intermittently, barely illuminating the name Chester's Curios. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stench of mildew. Shelves were crowded with tarnished jewelry, outdated electronics, and broken trinkets. The owner, Chester, was a wiry man with thinning hair and darting eyes. He flinched at the mention of the Iron Phoenix. I don't deal in stuff like that, Mr. Hughes, Chester protested, though his twitching hands betrayed him. Hughes leaned on the counter, fixing the man with a steely gaze. Let's save us both some time, Chester. You've heard of it, haven't you? Chester hesitated, then sighed. All right. Some drifter came in a couple days ago, trying to unload a bird-shaped hunk of iron. Didn't say much, but it was weird enough that I bought it. Barely had it a day before a man came in asking about it. Well-dressed fella. Said his name was Greaves. Paid a fortune for it, said he was taking it to some auction. Hughes raised an eyebrow. And you didn't think to ask where? Chester shook his head. Didn't want to know. That kind of thing brings trouble, and I've got enough of that already. With a name to follow, Hughes wasted no time tracking down Greaves. The man lived in a modest apartment in one of the city's older neighborhoods, a place that exuded faded grandeur. The building's creaky elevator groaned as it carried Hughes to the 4th floor. When he knocked on Greaves's door, there was no answer. A quick twist of the knob revealed it was unlocked. Hughes stepped inside cautiously, his revolver at the ready. The apartment was eerily silent. In the living room, Greaves sat slumped over a desk, his lifeless body illuminated by the faint glow of a desk lamp. His face was pale, and his fingers were still clutching a pen. The room had been ransacked, drawers overturned, papers strewn across the floor. Hughes scanned the desk and found a crumpled note near Greaves's hand. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared as if written in haste. Phoenix, Colony Warehouse. Before Hughes could process the discovery, a faint sound reached his ears, footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoing in the hallway. His instincts kicked in, and he moved behind a bookshelf just as the door creaked open. A shadow loomed in the doorway, and then a flash of light as a gunshot shattered the window. Hughes didn't wait. He fired back, his shot punching through the thin plaster wall. The shadow retreated, and Hughes rushed to the window, catching a glimpse of a figure disappearing into the foggy street below. Breathing heavily, he looked back at the disheveled apartment. Whoever had killed Greaves and come after him was clearly after the Iron Phoenix as well. With the note clutched tightly in his hand, Hughes knew his next stop, the Colony Warehouse, where more danger and answers awaited. The Colony Warehouse was an imposing structure, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the industrial district's distant lights. The air was thick with the smell of rust and oil, and the faint creak of the wind passing through broken windows added an eerie undertone. Hughes approached the building cautiously, his revolver in hand, every nerve on edge. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and dust. Rows of towering crates formed narrow passageways, their faded labels hinting at long-forgotten shipments. Hughes's boots echoed faintly as he navigated the maze, his eyes darting between the dark corners. At the center of the warehouse, his footsteps faltered. A single spotlight beamed down, illuminating a pedestal. Perched atop it was the Iron Phoenix, its black iron surface glinting faintly as if mocking him. The artifact was smaller than he'd expected, but its intricate craftsmanship and the glowing runes etched along its wings made it otherworldly. Hughes moved closer, his grip tightening on his gun. Something wasn't right. Persistent, "Aren't you, detective?" The voice came from the shadows, smooth and taunting. Hughes froze, his revolver snapping toward the source. Slowly, a figure stepped into the light, Vincent Cross, a name synonymous with crime and ruthlessness in the city. Cross was impeccably dressed, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the grime around him. Behind him, another figure emerged. Eleanor Vale. She held a gun trained on Hughes, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. Hughes's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. This was all a setup. Of course, Eleanor replied, her voice as calm as ever. Don't take it personally, Mr. Hughes. You were just a means to an end. Cross smirked. You made it easier for us to track down the Phoenix. I must say, your reputation is well deserved. And what's the plan now? Hughes asked, his tone hard. You shoot me and walk out of here with it? Something like that, Cross replied, his smirk widening. But let's be honest, you've meddled in my affairs for too long. This is overdue. Hughes's mind raced. He was outnumbered, but the Phoenix itself was the key. Its value wasn't just monetary, it held something more, something worth betraying and killing for. Greed always makes people stupid, Hughes said, stalling for time. The Phoenix has already left a trail of corpses. What makes you think you'll be any different? Cross's expression darkened. Enough talking. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Hughes dove to the side as Cross barked an order to his hidden accomplices. Shots rang out, echoing in the cavernous space as Hughes scrambled behind a stack of crates. Splinters flew as bullets riddled the wood, and Eleanor's calm composure shifted into sharp focus as she moved to flank him. Hughes fired back, his aim precise. One of Cross's men fell with a cry, and the others hesitated. Using the distraction, Hughes knocked over a stack of crates, sending them crashing down and creating a makeshift barricade. In the chaos, he caught sight of Eleanor hesitating, her gun lowered for a brief second. Something flickered in her expression, regret? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You can't run forever, detective. Cross called out, his voice filled with rage. The Phoenix is mine. Hughes didn't answer. His focus was on the artifact, still perched on the pedestal, untouched amid the storm of violence. He needed to reach it, but to do so, he'd have to outwit Cross and Eleanor in a game where betrayal was the only constant. The pounding of boots against the warehouse floor grew louder, reverberating through the cavernous space. The heavy steel doors swung open with a resounding clang, and in strode Calder. His rugged frame was clad in a weathered trench coat, and a cocky grin played on his face, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos before him. Known in Hughes's circles as a reckless opportunist, Calder's arrival signaled that the stakes had just risen dramatically. Looks like I'm late to the party, Calder drawled, his voice laced with a mix of amusement and menace. He drew a sleek revolver from his coat with practiced ease, aiming it at the nearest of Cross's men. Vincent Cross, standing by the shattered pedestal, turned with a snarl. You're out of your depth, Calder. Leave now, and you might walk out alive. Calder chuckled, clearly unbothered by the threat. Not a chance. I've got a thing for shiny objects, and that bird of yours looks like it's worth a fortune. The tension snapped like a bowstring. Cross barked an order, and his men opened fire without hesitation. Calder darted behind a stack of crates, returning fire with wild but accurate shots that forced Cross's crew to scatter for cover. The warehouse erupted into chaos as bullets ricocheted off metal beams, shattering the eerie quiet of the night. Hughes seized the opportunity the chaos provided. He slipped deeper into the shadows, weaving between crates and barrels. He noted every detail, the positions of Cross's men, Calder's unpredictable movements, and Eleanor Vale, who had disappeared into the periphery, her enigmatic intentions still unclear. Amid the pandemonium, a stray bullet struck the pedestal with a metallic clang. The iron phoenix, perched precariously, toppled to the ground with a deafening crash, its pieces scattering like shards of a fallen star. The sound of breaking iron momentarily stilled the gunfire, drawing all eyes to the shattered artifact. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before Hughes sprang into action. He darted forward, his heart pounding, and knelt amidst the debris. Among the fragments of the Iron Phoenix, his sharp gaze caught a glint of something unusual, a hidden compartment within the sculpture. Carefully prying it open, he extracted its contents, a fragile parchment, worn by time but clearly priceless. The map, intricately etched with cryptic symbols and directions, glowed faintly under the flickering warehouse lights. "This is what you were really after," Hughes murmured, the realization sharpening his focus. The Iron Phoenix had been nothing but a vessel, a decoy masking the true prize. Cross, seeing the map in Hughes's hand, lunged forward with a guttural roar. Desperation twisted his face as he reached for the parchment, but Hughes moved with precision. Sidestepping the clumsy attack, he delivered a sharp uppercut to Cross's jaw. The criminal crumpled to the floor, unconscious, his ambitions shattered alongside the Phoenix. Cross's men hesitated, their leader incapacitated, their resolve wavering. Calder, ever the opportunist, saw his moment. With a sly grin, he emerged from cover, his revolver aimed but his finger relaxed on the trigger. "Nice work, Hughes," he said, his tone almost friendly. "Now, how about you hand over that map, and I'll let you walk out of here." But before Hughes could respond, a faint rustle caught his ear. He turned just in time to see Eleanor slipping into the shadows, her green dress blending with the darkness. She looked back once, a fleeting smirk on her lips. "We'll meet again, Mr. Hughes," she said, her voice smooth and unhurried. Then she was gone, vanishing as if swallowed by the night. The room fell eerily quiet, the echoes of gunfire fading. Cross's men slowly retreated, dragging their leader with them. Hughes stood, his grip tightening on the fragile map. Calder holstered his revolver and gave Hughes a nod of grudging respect. "Guess this round's yours, Hughes," Calder said, his grin replaced by a calculating stare. "But don't think for a second I won't be following that map." Hughes pocketed the artifact, his mind already racing with possibilities and dangers. The Iron Phoenix was gone, but its secret had only just been uncovered. Whatever the map led to, it was valuable enough to draw the worst kinds of people, and Hughes knew this was just the beginning of a far more perilous journey. The wail of sirens echoed through the warehouse district as police vehicles surrounded the colony warehouse. Their flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene, painting jagged shadows on the grimy walls. Hughes stood by the shattered remnants of the Iron Phoenix, watching as officers cuffed Vincent Cross and Calder. Detective Inspector Marks, a grizzled veteran with a no-nonsense attitude, approached Hughes, his expression skeptical. "You've been busy again, Hughes," he said, glancing at the chaos. "Care to explain what I'm looking at?" "Just another night in the city," Hughes replied with a wry smile, handing Marks the broken pieces of the Iron Phoenix. "The artifact is a dead end now. Nothing more than a curiosity for your evidence locker." Marks studied Hughes, his sharp eyes searching for a hint of the real story. But Hughes kept his face unreadable. With a curt nod, Marks motioned for his team to bag the fragments and transport the suspects. Hughes watched as Cross was led away, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. Calder, ever the opportunist, gave Hughes a cocky smirk as he was shoved into the back of a police car. "You've got the map," Calder called out, his voice dripping with malice. "But don't think for a second this is over, Detective." Hughes didn't respond, his thoughts already elsewhere. Outside, The cool night air carried the faint hum of the city awakening from its shadowed slumber. Hughes walked away from the scene, his trench coat trailing behind him. The Iron Phoenix was finished, but the map, now safely tucked into his inner pocket, burned against his chest like a brand. Its cryptic symbols hinted at something far greater than the shattered artifact. The weight of the map lingered on him. What could it lead to? Treasure, power, or something darker? He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Yet the pull of the unknown, the thrill of unraveling a mystery, was something he could never resist. As he reached the edge of the industrial district, Hughes paused. In the distance, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars, a stark contrast to the darkness lurking beneath them. There would always be another case, another secret buried in the shadows. For now, the Iron Phoenix case was closed. But Hughes knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere in the tangled alleys and hidden corridors of the city, more mysteries awaited, calling to him like a siren's song. He lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply as the ember glowed in the night. One step closer, he muttered to himself. The map might hold answers, or it might unleash chaos. Either way, Stephen Raul Hughes was ready. Case 15, The Monastery Murders. A biting wind howled through the night, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and aged stone as Stephen Raul Hughes approached the gates of Sanctum Caelestis. The monastery loomed on the jagged hill like a fortress of secrecy, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. A single lantern swayed in the cold breeze, casting flickering shadows across the weathered walls. The iron gates creaked open as a somber figure emerged from the darkness. Brother Alaric, the prior of the monastery, greeted Hughes with a grave expression. His thin hands clasped together as if in silent prayer, and his deep-set eyes reflected a mix of relief and unease. "Mr. Hughes," Alaric began, his voice low but resolute. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We are men of faith, but faith cannot explain the horrors we've witnessed." As they ascended the stone steps into the monastery, Alaric recounted the chilling events that had unfolded over the past 3 weeks. 3 brothers, he said, his tone heavy with sorrow. 3 devout souls, taken in ways that defy reason. Brother Gabriel was the first, found dead in his cell, his lips blackened and his eyes wide with fear. Then Brother Silas collapsed in the library, clutching an ancient manuscript. And just days ago, Brother Marcus fell from the bell tower. The look on his face, Alaric paused, his voice faltering. It was as if he had seen the face of the devil himself. Hughes took in every detail, his sharp mind already weaving connections. "You mentioned something about books?" Alaric nodded. "Each death appears to be linked to a specific text from our library. The other brothers believe the books are cursed, that they carry the wrath of some vengeful spirit. But I cannot accept such superstitions. That's why I called you." The words hung in the air as they entered the cloistered halls. The dim light of flickering torches revealed stone walls lined with faded tapestries. The air was heavy with the scent of old parchment, beeswax candles, and a faint metallic tang that Hughes couldn't place. "Tell me about these texts," Hughes said, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Alaric hesitated before responding. "They are rare manuscripts, relics from our monastery's founding centuries ago. Brother Elias, our librarian, has been tasked with safeguarding them. But he has grown secretive. I fear his dedication has turned into obsession." Hughes's eyes narrowed. "And the other brothers? Have they seen or heard anything unusual?" "Only whispers," Alaric replied. Footsteps in empty corridors. Shadows where there should be none. They are terrified, Mr. Hughes. They speak of divine punishment, of a curse that has awakened to claim us all. As Alaric led Hughes deeper into the monastery, the investigator's skepticism was tempered by a growing sense of unease. He had faced death and deceit countless times, but there was something different about Sanctum Caelestis. Its walls seemed to hum with secrets, its shadows heavy with unspoken truths. For Hughes, this was more than a case of murder. It was a descent into a world where faith and reason collided, and where the line between myth and reality was as fragile as the flicker of a dying flame. The library of Sanctum Caelestis was a cathedral of knowledge, its towering shelves stretching into the shadows above. The scent of aged parchment and beeswax candles filled the air, mingling with the oppressive silence that hung like a shroud over the room. The flickering light from iron sconces illuminated the intricate carvings on the walls, depictions of saints, angels, and demons, their stony gazes bearing witness to centuries of secrets. Brother Elias, the head librarian, was a gaunt figure with a sharp, hawkish face and piercing eyes. His tone was clipped as he addressed Hughes, his suspicion evident. This is a sacred space, Mr. Hughes. No one enters without my permission, and even then, only for scholarly work approved by the prior. Hughes met Elias's glare with an even gaze. I'm not here to disturb your sanctum, brother. I'm here to uncover the truth. 3 men are dead, and this library seems to hold the key to their fates. Elias's lips tightened, but he said nothing more, retreating to his desk with a dismissive wave. Undeterred, Hughes began his inquiries, speaking with the monks who frequented the library. They spoke in hushed tones, their fear palpable. Each of the victims had been seen poring over forbidden texts in the days leading up to their deaths, manuscripts Elias vehemently refused to discuss. Hughes's persistence led him to Brother Matthias, the assistant librarian. Unlike Elias, Matthias was eager to talk, his eyes darting nervously as he leaned closer. There's one book that connects them all, Matthias whispered. The Book of Revelations. It's an ancient codex, locked away in the restricted section. Elias keeps the key. He says it's for our protection, but those who read it, they change. They see things. Change how? Hughes pressed. They become withdrawn. Distracted. As if the book reveals something that haunts them, Matthias explained, his voice trembling. Brother Silas was the last to study it. He claimed he found answers within its pages, but he never told anyone what they were. Now he's dead. That night, Hughes decided to take matters into his own hands. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the restricted section. The air grew colder as he descended the narrow stone staircase, the lamplight casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. The Book of Revelations was hidden behind an ornate iron gate, its lock intricate and adorned with religious symbols. Using a pick he had hidden in his coat, Hughes carefully worked the lock until it clicked open. The codex sat on a pedestal, its black leather cover etched with runes that seemed to shimmer faintly in the lamplight. As Hughes opened the book, a faint, acrid smell wafted from its pages. The text was inscribed in a language he didn't recognize, the symbols curling and twisting as though alive. A chill ran down his spine as he traced his finger over the parchment, noting faint smudges on the edges, evidence of the victim's hands. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Hughes extinguished his lamp and concealed himself behind a column. Brother Elias entered the room, his face pale and drawn. He knelt before the book, clasping his hands in prayer. His whispers were frantic and barely audible, a litany of desperation that sent a shiver through Hughes. Elias stood abruptly, his hand brushing the edge of the book as though it burned him. Without looking back, he hurried from the room, leaving Hughes alone once more. As Hughes stepped out from his hiding place, his mind churned with questions. What secret did the book hold that could drive men to their deaths? And why was Elias so desperate to keep it hidden? For the first time, Hughes felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't just a case, it was a puzzle layered with fear, faith, and something far darker. Hughes delved into the daily routines and relationships of the victims, seeking patterns or anomalies. He spoke with the remaining monks, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Most were reluctant to speak, their words guarded, but one, the young herbalist Brother Lucian, offered a vital clue. "There's something you should know," Lucian said hesitantly, his hands trembling as he clutched a rosary. "The deaths, they may not be the work of divine wrath, but of something more earthly. A plant, mortemflor. It's rare, almost mythical, used in ancient rituals for its dual nature. It can heal or kill, depending on how it's prepared. Have you seen this plant here?" Hughes asked, his voice steady but sharp. Lucian nodded. "I've never handled it myself, but I've seen traces of it in the herbarium in the victims' quarters. A fine powder, faint but unmistakable." Armed with this lead, Hughes inspected the cells of the deceased. In Brother Gabriel's chamber, he found a small vial tucked behind a loose brick in the wall. Its contents were faintly iridescent, the telltale residue of mortemflor. Similarly, in Brother Silas's desk, Hughes discovered scraps of parchment with notes written in a hurried hand. The truth lies buried in the foundation, sins upon sins. The pieces began to fall into place. Someone within the monastery was using the plant as a weapon, targeting those who had ventured too close to an unspoken truth. But what was this truth, and why would it warrant such measures? Hughes returned to Brother Matthias, the assistant librarian, who had been unusually forthcoming. "The Book of Revelations," Matthias whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire in the scriptorium, "is not what it seems. It doesn't contain divine wisdom. It's a record, a chronicle of the monastery's founding. And what it reveals," Matthias hesitated, his eyes darting to the shadows. "If it became known, it would destroy everything." "What does it reveal?" Hughes pressed. Matthias swallowed hard. "A massacre. When this place was established, it wasn't a haven for faith, it was a site of slaughter. The original monks killed the villagers who lived here to claim the land as holy ground. They buried the bodies beneath the monastery and rewrote history to sanctify their deeds. The victims discovered this?" Matthias nodded. Each one pieced together fragments of the story. Brother Gabriel was the first. He found references in old correspondences. Brother Silas uncovered annotations in the margins of the codex. And Brother Marcus, he planned to confront the prior. Hughes leaned back, his mind racing. The deaths were no divine punishment, but a deliberate act to protect the monastery's darkest secret. Someone in Sanctum Caelestis had taken it upon themselves to silence those who threatened to expose the truth. "Who has access to mortemflor?" Hughes asked, though he suspected the answer. "Only those who work in the herbarium," Matthias replied. "But Elias oversees all restricted materials, including the plants." Hughes's gaze darkened. Brother Elias had not only guarded the library but also the monastery's secrets, and perhaps its sins. The question was he the murderer, or merely another pawn in a deadly game of silence? Hughes stood in the dimly lit library, his eyes narrowing as he faced Brother Elias. The towering shelves of ancient tomes loomed over them like silent witnesses, their leather-bound spines filled with knowledge that had long been concealed. "You were behind the murders," Hughes accused, his voice low and steady, the weight of the revelation pressing on him. Elias flinched, his eyes darting nervously to the door, as if hoping for a miracle. I didn't," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I'm just a servant of the order. I didn't kill anyone." Hughes stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Then why all the secrecy? Why the deaths of those who sought to expose the truth? Why the book?" Elias trembled, his hands shaking as if he could no longer hold the burden of his lies. His breath came in ragged gasps, and finally, with a desperate cry, he dropped his head in defeat. "They would have destroyed us," he sobbed. "The book holds knowledge too dangerous for anyone to possess. The others, they wanted to expose it, to desecrate what we have built here. You don't understand. They had to die. It was the only way to protect it." Before Hughes could press further, the lights above them flickered, casting ominous shadows that danced across the walls. From the darkness at the far end of the library, Brother Alaric emerged. His face was obscured by the flickering light, but his presence was undeniable. There was something cold, calculating, and utterly unshakable about him. "Enough," Alaric said, his voice calm but filled with an icy authority. "This ends now." Hughes froze, the realization hitting him with the force of a sledgehammer. He had been so focused on Elias that he hadn't seen the true mastermind lurking in the shadows. Alaric had orchestrated everything. He was the architect of the chaos, using Elias as a mere pawn in his grand scheme. The abbot's cold gaze fixed on Hughes as he slowly stepped forward, the silence between them thick with tension. "You think you understand," Alaric continued, his voice smooth and deliberate. "But faith, Mr. Hughes, is fragile. The truth is a weapon, one that can shatter everything. My duty is to protect the flock, no matter the cost." He took another deliberate step, his fingers brushing the hilt of a ceremonial dagger hidden beneath his robes. The dagger gleamed in the low light, its razor-sharp edge catching the reflection of the flickering lanterns. Alaric's movements were fluid, controlled, as he lunged at Hughes with the speed of a striking serpent. But Hughes had seen enough to know that the moment of truth had arrived. He sidestepped just in time, the dagger slicing through the air where his chest had been moments before. A brief, brutal struggle followed as the two men grappled, Hughes using his years of training to fight with precision, Alaric relying on his strength and fervor. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the library, the scuffle growing more desperate. At last, with a swift movement, Hughes managed to disarm Alaric, sending the dagger clattering across the floor. Before the abbot could react, Hughes pinned him to the cold stone floor. His arm pressing down hard against Alaric's chest, forcing the air from his lungs. Alaric's fury was palpable, but Hughes' grip was unyielding. "You've lost," Hughes said, his voice a deadly whisper. "It's over." Alaric's eyes burned with a cold, unrepentant fire as he glared up at Hughes. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but you have no idea what you've set in motion." The words hung in the air like a lingering threat, and Hughes knew this was only the beginning. With Alaric and Elias unmasked, the weight of their treachery hung heavy in the air like an unspoken curse. The remaining monks, once loyal servants of the order, were now faced with the truth of the darkness that had festered beneath their vows. Their sacred walls, long thought to be a sanctuary of peace, had become the breeding ground for corruption, violence, and betrayal. The silence that followed was suffocating. None could look each other in the eye without seeing the horror of what had been done. The police arrived, their footsteps echoing down the monastery's hallowed halls as they moved to arrest the conspirators. Alaric, still defiant even in chains, offered no words of remorse. Elias, broken and defeated, had little to say, save for whispers of regret. The weight of their actions had crushed them both, but it was clear that no amount of atonement could erase the bloodshed or the secrets they had guarded so fiercely. The cursed book of Revelations, the source of so much destruction, was sealed away in a distant archive, its pages now locked behind iron doors. No one would ever read it again, not for knowledge, not for power, and certainly not for the twisted revelations it contained. The secrets of the book, like the monks who had once worshipped it, were buried, never to rise again. As Hughes prepared to leave Sanctum Caelestis, his mind heavy with the toll the case had taken, Brother Matthias approached him. The monk's face was somber, his eyes reflecting the sorrow of all that had unfolded. With a trembling hand, Matthias handed Hughes a single, fragile page from the book. Hughes unfolded the parchment carefully, the edges yellowed with age. The words were faint, but legible. It told the story of the monastery's true founding, not as a haven for the devout, but as a fortress built on greed, violence, and betrayal. The founding monks had used faith as a shield, hiding their true motives behind the veil of sanctity. The page was a damning testament to a history built on lies, a history that would destroy everything the order had once claimed to stand for. The truth deserves to be known, Matthias said, his voice quiet but resolute. Even if it destroys us. Hughes studied the page for a moment, then tucked it carefully into his coat pocket. Some truths, he said softly, are better left buried. But Matthias shook his head, a quiet resolve in his eyes. Perhaps. But it's already too late. The truth has already begun to tear at the fabric of our lives. With those final words, Hughes turned away. The monastery, once a symbol of faith and tranquility, now seemed like a ghost of its former self, shrouded in the mist of its own downfall. The case was solved, but the aftermath was far from over. The scars of the revelations would never fade. For every answer uncovered, another question lingered, gnawing at the edges of certainty and faith. As Hughes made his way down the narrow path that led away from the monastery, the dense fog rolling in from the valley seemed to swallow the towering structure behind him. He stopped just outside the gates, lighting a cigarette, the ember glowing like a fragile thread of truth in the darkness. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the night, a fleeting symbol of the delicate balance between truth and lies. For a brief moment, Hughes stood there in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on him. But in the end, there was only one thing left to do. He took a long drag from the cigarette, letting the smoke fill his lungs. The embers flickered, as fragile and uncertain as the line between the world he knew and the truths that had shattered it. And with that, he walked away.
Every answer, S.R.H. finds digs another grave, but that's the job. This was episode 3 of the case files of Detective S.R.H. Cases 11 to 15, written by me, Raul, only on Audible Archives. If you're still following the trail, like, comment, and subscribe, because in this world, truth is the most dangerous lead of all. And so, the tale draws to a close, but the echoes remain here in the Audible Archives. And until our next journey through shadow and story, keep listening, keep wondering, because every ending hides another beginning. Audible Archives, where stories never sleep.